The blood on Eleanor Finch's hands had long since dried when she stumbled into Fort Worth, Texas, with nothing but the tattered dress on her back, and a heart so broken she wondered if it would ever beat properly again. It was late summer in 1878, and the heat rose from the dusty streets in visible waves that made the wooden buildings shimmer like a mirage. Eleanor had walked for 3 days straight after burying her mother beside the burned remains of their homestead, and every step had been an act of pure will. She was 22 years old, alone in the world, and possessed nothing of value except the memory of her mother's final words. "Find somewhere safe, Ellie. Find somewhere you can breathe." Fort Worth wasn't much to look at, but it was a town, and towns meant work, and work meant survival. Eleanor's stomach had been empty for so long it had stopped hurting, replaced by a hollow numbness that matched the feeling in her chest. She walked down the main street, aware of the eyes on her, the way men looked at a woman traveling alone. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles past her shoulders, and her dress was torn at the hem and stained with dirt and smoke. She must have looked like exactly what she was desperate. The saloon seemed as good a place as any to ask about work, though Eleanor had never set foot in such an establishment in her life. Her mother had been a God-fearing woman who believed in hard work and clean living, and Eleanor had been raised the same way. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and if washing dishes or scrubbing floors in a saloon was what it took to eat, then that was what she would do. She pushed through the swinging doors into the dim interior, and the conversation died like someone had snuffed out a candle. A dozen pairs of eyes turned toward her, and Eleanor fought the urge to turn and run. Instead, she lifted her chin and walked to the bar where a heavy-set woman with rouge on her cheeks was pouring whiskey. "I need work," Eleanor said, her voice coming out rougher than she intended. "I can clean, cook, mend clothes, anything honest." The woman looked her up and down with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You running from something, girl, from nothing, toward survival." A slow smile crossed the woman's painted lips. "I like you. I'm Margaret Howe, and I run this establishment. Can't pay much, but you can sleep in the back room and eat what the cook makes. You'll clean, serve drinks, and keep your wits about you. No entertaining the customers, you understand. I run a respectable place, all things considered." Eleanor nodded, relief flooding through her so strongly her knees nearly buckled. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Work starts now. There's a bucket and mop in the back. Start with the floors." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of exhaustion and routine. Eleanor scrubbed floors until her hands were raw, served whiskey to cowboys and gamblers, and learned to dodge wandering hands with practiced efficiency. She slept on a narrow cot in a windowless room that smelled of old tobacco and spilled beer, and she ate simple meals of beans and cornbread that tasted like heaven after her days of starvation. It wasn't much of a life, but it was life, and that was more than she'd had when she arrived. It was a Thursday afternoon in early September when everything changed. Eleanor was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the saloon, trying to clear away the dust that seemed to settle everywhere no matter how often she cleaned, when she heard the commotion down the street. Shouts and the sound of horses moving fast, and then a gunshot that made her drop the broom and press herself against the wall. 2 men on horseback came thundering down the main street, and behind them came a rider unlike any Eleanor had ever seen. He sat astride a massive roan horse, his body moving with the animal's gait as if they were one creature. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the breadth of his shoulders and the way his long, dark hair flew behind him as he rode. He wore buckskin and leather, and there was a rifle across his back that looked like it had seen plenty of use. The 2 men in front were clearly running from him, and they were losing ground fast. The big man on the roan closed the distance with the kind of skill that spoke of years in the saddle, and when he drew alongside the first rider, he reached out with one massive arm and hauled the man clear off his horse. The outlaw hit the ground hard, rolling in the dust, and the big man was off his own horse in a smooth motion that belied his size. He had the fallen man by the collar before the outlaw could even think about reaching for his gun. The second rider made the mistake of turning back to help his companion. He got his pistol halfway out of its holster before the big man's fist connected with his jaw, and he went down like a sack of grain. The whole fight, if you could call it that, was over in less than a minute. Eleanor stood frozen on the boardwalk, broom forgotten, as the big man dragged both outlaws toward the sheriff's office. That was when he looked up and his eyes met hers. They were the color of dark honey, set in a face that was all hard angles and weathered by sun and wind. A thick beard covered his jaw, and there was a scar that ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline. He should have looked frightening, and perhaps he did, but there was something in his eyes that caught Eleanor off guard. Intelligence, she thought, and maybe loneliness. The moment passed, and he looked away, hauling his prisoners into the sheriff's office. Eleanor realized she'd been holding her breath. "That's Pierce Yates," Margaret said from behind her, making Eleanor jump. The older woman had come out to watch the commotion. "Mountain man from up north. Comes down a few times a year with pelts to trade and occasionally brings in outlaws for the bounty. Keeps to himself mostly, though he's always been decent enough when he's had cause to speak to me." "He's very large," Eleanor said, then felt foolish for stating the obvious. Margaret laughed. "That he is. All muscle and mountain, that one. I've seen him drink men twice as loud under the table without so much as slurring a word, and I've never seen him start a fight, though he's finished plenty. If you're smart, you'll keep your distance. Men like that are nothing but trouble for girls like you." But Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about those honey-colored eyes, or the way he'd moved with such controlled power. She went back to her sweeping, telling herself it didn't matter. Men like that didn't notice women like her, women with nothing to their names and no prospects beyond scrubbing floors. She was wrong. That evening, Pierce Yates walked into the saloon just as Eleanor was serving dinner to a table of card players. She saw him immediately. Impossible to miss given his size. He had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe, and when he straightened, he seemed to fill the entire room. Men shifted out of his way without even realizing they were doing it, a testament to the quiet authority he carried. He took a seat at the corner table, his back to the wall in the way of a man who'd learned to watch his surroundings, and when Margaret went over to take his order, Eleanor found herself straining to hear their conversation. The usual Pierce. "Yes, madam." "Whiskey and whatever the cooks made that's hot." His voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling in a canyon, and it did something strange to Eleanor's insides. She forced herself to focus on delivering plates of stew and cornbread, but she was acutely aware of exactly where he was sitting, and the way his eyes seemed to track her movements around the room. When Margaret brought his food, Eleanor watched from the corner of her eye as he ate with the methodical efficiency of someone who viewed meals as fuel rather than pleasure. He'd ordered beef and potatoes, and he cleaned his plate in the kind of silence that suggested he was used to eating alone. Eleanor was carrying a tray of empty glasses back to the bar when one of the card players, a ranch hand named Billy who'd had too much to drink, grabbed her wrist. "How about a smile, sweetheart?" Billy's breath reeked of whiskey and his grip was too tight. "You're too pretty to look so serious all the time. Let me go, please." Eleanor tried to pull away, but Billy held fast, grinning up at her with bleary eyes. "Just being friendly. No need to be unfriendly back. The lady asked you to let go." The voice came from directly behind Eleanor, and it was quiet but carried the weight of absolute certainty. Pierce Yates had moved from his corner table without making a sound, and now he stood there like a wall of muscle and determination. Billy looked up, and whatever he saw in Pierce's face made him release Eleanor's wrist immediately. Didn't mean nothing by it, I'm sure. Pierce didn't move, didn't threaten, but Billy and his friends threw some coins on the table and left quickly anyway. Eleanor rubbed her wrist, which was red but not badly hurt, and looked up at the mountain man. Up close, he was even more imposing. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they strained the buckskin shirt he wore. His arms were corded with muscle, and his hands looked like they could crush stone, but his expression was gentle as he looked down at her. "Thank you," Eleanor said softly. "I had it handled, but thank you." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'm sure you did, but there's no harm in a little help now and then." He returned to his table, and Eleanor went back to work, but she could still feel the warmth of where he'd stood close to her, and the surprising gentleness in his eyes. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find Margaret standing over her cot with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite read. "Get yourself presentable," Margaret said. "Pierce Yates is asking to speak with you." Eleanor's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Why?" "Didn't say, and I didn't ask. But men like that don't ask for things without reason. I told him you'd meet him out front in 10 minutes. Eleanor dressed in her only other dress, which was barely better than the one she'd been wearing, and tried to do something with her hair. She'd washed it the night before in the basin in her room, and it fell in dark waves past her shoulders. She had no mirror to check her appearance, so she simply hoped she looked acceptable and went out through the saloon's front door. Pierce Yates was waiting on the boardwalk, his horse tied to the post nearby. In the morning light, he looked even more intimidating, all hard muscle and weathered confidence. But when he saw her, his expression softened in a way that made Eleanor's breath catch. "Miss Finch," he said, and she wondered how he knew her name. "I hope I'm not imposing. I wanted to speak with you if you're willing." "I'm willing," Eleanor said, then wondered if that sounded too eager. Pierce seemed to consider his words carefully before speaking. "I've been coming to Fort Worth for near on 5 years now, and in that time, I've learned to read people pretty well. You're new here, and you're running from something or towards something, I'm not sure which. But I wanted you to know that if you ever need help, real help, I'm at a cabin about 2 days' ride north of here, up in the high country. Anyone at the trading post can give you directions." Eleanor stared at him. "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" "Because I know what it's like to have nothing and no one. And because when I look at you, I see someone trying to survive with dignity, and that's worth something in this world." Before Eleanor could respond, he tipped his hat to her and mounted his horse in one smooth motion. "Take care of yourself, Miss Finch." He rode out of town, heading north, and Eleanor stood on the boardwalk watching until he disappeared from sight, wondering if she'd just imagined the entire conversation. The days that followed settled back into routine, but Eleanor found herself thinking about Pierce Yates at the strangest times. When she was scrubbing floors, she'd remember the controlled power in the way he'd moved. When she was lying on her cot at night, she'd think about the unexpected gentleness in his voice, and the way he'd offered help without asking for anything in return. 3 weeks passed, and Eleanor began to think she'd never see him again. Then, on a cool morning in late September, he walked back into the saloon carrying a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Miss Finch," he said, spotting her immediately. "Do you have a moment?" Margaret gave Eleanor a look that clearly said she'd be wanting details later, but she nodded permission. Eleanor followed Pierce outside, her heart hammering in her chest. "I've been working on something," Pierce said, and there was an uncertainty in his voice she hadn't heard before. "And I thought maybe you might like it." He held out the bundle, and Eleanor took it with shaking hands. The oilcloth fell away to reveal a wooden box about the size of a small book. It was made of what looked like cherry wood, polished to a soft glow, and carved with intricate designs of mountains and pine trees. On the top, carved in flowing script, was her name, Eleanor. "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "But I don't understand. Why would you make this for me?" "Open it," Pierce said softly. Eleanor lifted the lid, and the most incredible thing happened. Tiny gears and pins began to move, and music filled the air. It was a simple melody, sweet and haunting, and it took Eleanor a moment to realize what she was hearing. The music box was playing her name. Not just any song, but a melody that somehow captured the syllables of Eleanor in musical notes, over and over in a gentle refrain. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She'd never owned anything beautiful in her entire life. Her childhood had been one of necessity and survival, of making do with what they had. Her mother had loved her, but there had never been money for frivolous things, never anything beyond the basics of food and shelter. And now this stranger, this mountain man with gentle eyes, had carved her a music box that played her name. "I've made you cry," Pierce said, sounding distressed. "I didn't mean to upset you." "You didn't upset me." Eleanor's voice was thick with tears. "No one has ever given me anything like this. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to have something beautiful, something that was yours." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "I've been alone for a long time, Miss Finch. I've got a good life up in those mountains, and I'm not complaining. But when I saw you that first day, something shifted in me. You looked so lost and so brave at the same time, and I couldn't stop thinking about you. I know I've got no right to say such things to a lady, and if I've offended you, I apologize. But I wanted you to know that someone sees you, someone thinks you deserve beautiful things." Eleanor looked up at this massive man with his scarred face and his gentle heart, and something inside her that had been frozen since her mother's death began to thaw. "You haven't offended me. You've given me the most precious gift I've ever received. Thank you, Mr. Yates." "Pierce," he said. "Please call me Pierce." "Then you must call me Eleanor." They stood there on the boardwalk, looking at each other, and Eleanor felt the world shift around her. This was the moment everything changed, she thought. This was the moment her life became something more than just survival. "Would you like to take a walk with me?" Pierce asked. "Just around town, nothing improper, but I'd like to talk with you if you're willing." Eleanor glanced back at the saloon. It was still early, and Margaret wouldn't need her for another hour. "I'd like that very much." They walked down the dusty streets of Fort Worth, an unlikely pair that drew curious stares. Pierce was so large that he made Eleanor feel delicate in comparison, though she'd never thought of herself that way before. He walked slowly to match her pace, and he kept a respectful distance between them, his hands clasped behind his back. "Tell me about the mountains," Eleanor said. "What's it like up there?" Pierce's face transformed when he talked about his home. "It's wild and beautiful in a way that's hard to describe. My cabin sits in a valley with a stream running through it, and in the morning, the mist hangs over the water like something out of a dream. The air is so clean it almost hurts to breathe at first, and at night, the stars are so bright you could read by them. In winter, the snow gets deep enough to bury the cabin halfway up the walls, and in spring, the wildflowers cover the meadows in every color you can imagine." "It sounds like paradise," Eleanor said wistfully. "It can be lonely too," Pierce admitted. "I've got my horse and a dog named Bear who's terrible at hunting but good company. I trap and hunt, trade my pelts a few times a year, and mostly keep to myself. It's a good life, but it's a solitary one. Eleanor wanted to ask why he lived alone, why a man like him didn't have a wife and family, but it seemed too forward a question. Instead, she said, I grew up on a homestead about a week's ride from here. It was just my mother and me. She raised me after my father died when I was small. The fire that brought you here? Pierce asked gently. Eleanor stopped walking, surprise and old pain warring in her chest. How did you know about that? I could smell the smoke on you that first day, and I've seen enough of grief to recognize it. He turned to face her fully, and his eyes were filled with understanding. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Eleanor's throat tightened. She was all I had in the world. When she was gone, I didn't know what to do except walk until I found somewhere to stop. Pierce reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and large enough to engulf hers completely. You're not alone anymore, Eleanor. If you want a friend, you have one in me. The tears came again, but they were different this time. Not tears of grief or shock, but tears of relief and something that felt dangerously like hope. I'd like that very much, Pierce. They walked back to the saloon hand in hand, and when Pierce said goodbye, he promised to return soon. Eleanor went inside, clutching the music box to her chest, and Margaret took one look at her face and smiled. That man is halfway in love with you already, Margaret said. And unless I miss my guess, you're not far behind. Eleanor couldn't deny it. She opened the music box and listened to her name playing in that sweet melody. And she thought about honey-colored eyes and gentle strength. And she let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to have someone who carved music boxes just for her. Pierce returned to Fort Worth 3 days later, and the 3 days after that, and soon his visits became a regular part of Eleanor's life. He would arrive in the morning and they would walk together, talking about everything and nothing. Pierce told her about his childhood in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, and heading west with nothing but a rifle and a horse. He told her about learning to survive in the mountains, about the year he nearly starved, and the old trapper who taught him everything he knew before dying peacefully in his sleep one winter. Eleanor told him about her mother's strength and kindness, about the books they'd read together by candlelight, and the songs her mother used to sing. She told him about the fear she'd felt arriving in Fort Worth alone, and the gratitude she felt to Margaret for giving her a chance. But more than the words they shared, it was the silences that meant the most. The comfortable quiet of two people who didn't need to fill every moment with sound. The way Pierce would look at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, his eyes soft with something that made her heart race. The way her hand seemed to fit perfectly in his when they walked. It was mid-October when Pierce asked her to come see his cabin. They were sitting on a bench outside the general store, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. I know it's a forward request, Pierce said, his voice careful. But I'd like you to see my home, to understand what my life is like up there. Margaret could come as chaperone if you'd like, to keep things proper. We could make it a weekend trip, stay in the valley for a couple days, and I could bring you both back safe. Eleanor's heart leaped at the thought of seeing the place Pierce had described with such love. I'll ask Margaret. But Pierce, I trust you. I don't need a chaperone to feel safe with you. I appreciate that, but I want to do this right. I don't want anyone questioning your honor. The fact that he cared about her reputation made Eleanor's chest feel warm. Then I'll ask Margaret to come with us. Margaret agreed, with the condition that she got to ride instead of walk, and that Pierce promised to have her back by Monday because the saloon needed running. So the following Saturday, Eleanor found herself on horseback for the first time in years, following Pierce north into the high country with Margaret riding beside her. The journey took 2 full days, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences of Eleanor's life. They rode through valleys painted with autumn colors, crossed crystal-clear streams, and climbed into mountains that seemed to touch the sky. Pierce was endlessly patient, helping Eleanor when her horse balked at a steep section, pointing out deer and elk grazing in the meadows, and making camp each night with practiced efficiency. On the second evening, they crested a ridge and Pierce pointed down into a valley below. "That's home." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The valley was everything Pierce had described and more. A log cabin sat beside a stream that sparkled in the fading light, surrounded by towering pines and aspens that were golden with fall. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and steady, and as they rode closer, a massive dog came bounding out to greet them, barking joyfully. "Bear down," Pierce commanded, and the dog immediately sat, though his tail never stopped wagging. "Eleanor, Margaret, meet Bear. He looks fierce, but he's mostly just enthusiastic." The cabin interior was simple but well made, with solid furniture that Pierce had clearly built himself, a large stone fireplace, and shelves lined with books that surprised Eleanor. Pierce saw her looking and smiled. "I may live in the mountains, but that doesn't mean I'm uneducated. I've got Shakespeare and Dickens up here, and I've read them all twice over during the long winters." Margaret took the guest room, and Pierce insisted Eleanor take his bed while he slept on a bedroll by the fire. Eleanor protested, but he was immovable on the subject, and she finally gave in, touched by his consideration. That night, lying in Pierce's bed surrounded by the smell of pine and wood smoke, Eleanor listened to the stream outside and the crackling fire, and she thought about what it would be like to live here. To wake up every morning to this view, to share her life with a man who carved music boxes and read Shakespeare and treated her like she was something precious. The next day, Pierce showed them his life. He took them to the stream where he caught trout for breakfast, showed them the smokehouse where he preserved meat for winter, and walked them through the forest, pointing out animal tracks and medicinal plants. He was in his element here, moving through the wilderness with the confidence of someone who belonged. Eleanor watched him chop wood for the fire, his muscles working beneath his shirt, the axe swinging with precise, powerful strokes. She saw him gentle, a nervous squirrel that came to steal nuts from his store, speaking to it softly until it ate from his hand. She saw the way he looked at his valley with love and pride, and she fell deeper in love with him with every passing moment. That evening, while Margaret dozed in her chair after dinner, Pierce and Eleanor sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The music box sat between them, playing its gentle melody into the night. "I need to tell you something," Pierce said, his voice quiet but intense. "And I hope you'll forgive me for speaking plainly, but I'm not a man who knows how to be anything but honest." Eleanor's heart began to pound. "I'm listening. I've been alone most of my life by choice. After my parents died, I didn't see much point in letting people close. It hurt too much when they left. So I came up here to the mountains where it was just me and the wilderness, and I told myself I was content. And maybe I was, in a way. But then I saw you standing on that boardwalk in Fort Worth, looking lost and brave and beautiful, and something in me woke up that I didn't even know was sleeping." He turned to face her fully, and in the starlight his eyes were bright with emotion. "I'm in love with you, Eleanor Finch. I've been in love with you since the day I first saw you. And I know I'm just a rough mountain man with nothing much to offer but a cabin in the wilderness and a heart that's yours if you want it. But I had to tell you, because keeping it inside was becoming impossible." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "You think you have nothing to offer? Pierce, you've given me more in these past weeks than anyone ever has in my entire life. You've made me feel seen and valued and cared for. You carved me a music box that plays my name because you wanted me to have something beautiful. You've shown me kindness and respect and a kind of gentle strength I didn't even know existed. How could I not love you back? Pierce's expression transformed with wonder and joy. You love me. I love you so much it terrifies me, Eleanor said, laughing through her tears. I never thought I'd feel this way about anyone. I thought my life was over when my mother died, that I'd spend whatever years I had left just surviving. But then you rode into town and everything changed. You changed me. Pierce reached out and cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. May I kiss you, Eleanor, please, she whispered. His kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, his lips soft despite his rough exterior. But when Eleanor leaned into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing and love and promises for the future. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Come live with me in this valley and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy. I'll build you anything you want, carve you 1,000 music boxes, read you Shakespeare by the fire every night. Just say yes. Yes, Eleanor said, and then again, louder, yes, I'll marry you. From inside the cabin came Margaret's voice, thick with amusement. About time you two figured it out. Now can we all get some sleep? They were married in Fort Worth 3 weeks later, in a small ceremony at the church with Margaret and the sheriff standing witness. Eleanor wore a simple dress that Margaret had helped her sew from fabric Pierce had bought at the general store, and Pierce wore a new shirt with his buckskins, his long hair tied back and his beard neatly trimmed. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Pierce kissed Eleanor like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Eleanor knew she'd found her home. They spent one night at the hotel in Fort Worth, a luxury Pierce insisted on despite Eleanor's protests that it wasn't necessary. But lying in his arms in an actual bed, listening to his heartbeat beneath her ear and feeling safe for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eleanor was grateful for his insistence. Tell me about our life, she said softly. Tell me what it will be like. Pierce's arms tightened around her. We'll wake with the sun and I'll make you coffee while you're still wrapped in blankets. We'll work together during the day, tending the cabin and the land, and I'll teach you to fish and track and read the wilderness. In the evenings, we'll cook dinner together and read by the fire, and I'll hold you close and thank God every day that you're mine. And when winter comes and the snow buries us in, we'll stay warm together and count ourselves lucky. It sounds perfect, Eleanor murmured, and she meant it. They left for the mountains the next morning, and this time when Eleanor rode into the valley, it was as Pierce's wife, coming home. The cabin seemed to welcome her, or maybe that was just Pierce's joy at having her there making everything brighter. He carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, and Bear danced around them barking his approval. The first weeks of their marriage were an education in happiness. Eleanor learned that Pierce was an early riser who liked to watch the sunrise with his coffee, and that he hummed while he worked even though he claimed he couldn't carry a tune. She learned that he was patient when teaching her new skills, never making her feel foolish when she struggled to gut a fish or identify animal tracks. She learned that he was passionate and tender in equal measure, and that being loved by Pierce Yates was like being wrapped in warmth and safety and desire all at once. Pierce learned that Eleanor was stronger than she looked, able to carry water from the stream without complaint and work beside him for hours without tiring. He learned that she had a beautiful singing voice and that she liked to sing while she cooked, filling the cabin with music. He learned that she was curious about everything, asking questions about the plants and animals and weather patterns, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. and he learned that loving Eleanor was the easiest and best thing he'd ever done. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in mid-November and not stopping for 3 days. Eleanor stood at the window watching the flakes fall, the music box playing softly on the table behind her, and she felt a contentment so deep it made her chest ache. "What are you thinking?" Pierce asked, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm thinking about how different my life is now. A year ago, I was watching my mother die and wondering how I'd survive. 6 months ago, I was washing floors in a saloon and trying not to think about the future. And now I'm here with you, watching the snow fall in the most beautiful place I've ever seen, and I'm so happy I almost can't believe it's real." Pierce turned her in his arms and kissed her forehead. "It's real, love, and it's just the beginning." The winter was long and hard, but Eleanor had never been happier. They spent their days working together to maintain the cabin and care for the animals, and their evenings reading by the fire or talking about everything and nothing. Pierce taught her to carve wood, and she made him a cup that was lopsided but functional, and he used it every morning with such obvious pride that it made her heart swell. On Christmas morning, Pierce gave her another music box, this one carved with flowers and birds, and when she opened it, it played a melody he'd composed himself. "It's called Eleanor's Song," he said shyly. "I worked on it all fall, trying to capture what you mean to me in music." Eleanor gave him a scarf she'd knitted from wool she'd carded and spun herself, the stitches not quite even but made with love. "It's not as beautiful as what you made me," she said. "It's perfect because you made it," Pierce insisted, wrapping it around his neck immediately. "I'll treasure it always." Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting to reveal the valley in shades of green and gold. Eleanor helped Pierce plant a garden, and she watched in wonder as the seeds they'd carefully placed in the earth began to sprout and grow. She'd never had a garden of her own before, and the idea that these plants would feed them through the next winter filled her with a sense of accomplishment she'd never experienced. It was a warm day in early June when Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She'd been feeling odd for weeks, tired and queasy in the mornings, and when her monthly courses failed to arrive, she knew. The realization filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She wanted this baby, wanted to give Pierce a family, but the memory of all the dangers of childbirth made her afraid. She told him that evening as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance over the stream, "I'm going to have a baby." Pierce went very still, and for a moment, Eleanor worried he wasn't happy. Then he turned to her with tears streaming down his face, and he pulled her into his arms so gently it was like being cradled by the wind. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, Eleanor." He said her name like a prayer. "You've given me everything. A home, a purpose, a reason to wake up grateful every morning. And now a child. I don't have words for how much I love you." "Show me," Eleanor said, and he did, carrying her inside and loving her with a tenderness that made her cry. The pregnancy was difficult. Eleanor was sick for months, barely able to keep food down, and Pierce hovered over her with such concern that she finally had to shoo him away so she could breathe. But as the baby grew and her sickness faded, a new glow settled over her. Pierce talked to her belly every night, telling their unborn child about the valley and the life they would have. And Eleanor would run her fingers through his long hair and feel so much love she thought she might burst with it. They rode down to Fort Worth in early fall to see the doctor and stock up on supplies they'd need for the birth. Margaret took one look at Eleanor's rounded belly and burst into tears, hugging her so hard Pierce had to gently intervene. "I'm so happy for you both," Margaret said, wiping her eyes. "You deserve this, every bit of it." The doctor examined Eleanor and pronounced her healthy, though he recommended she stay in town for the birth since it would be her first and complications could arise. But Eleanor refused. She wanted her baby born in the cabin Pierce had built, surrounded by the mountains they both loved. "I'll take care of her," Pierce promised the doctor. "I've delivered calves and foals. I know it's not the same, but I'll do everything I can to keep them both safe." They returned to the valley, loaded with supplies and medical books the doctor had lent them, and Pierce read every word, memorizing what to do and what to watch for. Eleanor loved him even more for his dedication, for the way he took this responsibility so seriously. Winter arrived again, and with it, the baby. Eleanor's labor started on a snowy evening in late January, gentle contractions that gradually grew stronger. Pierce was terrified, she could see it in his eyes, but his hands were steady as he helped her through each contraction, his voice calm as he told her she was doing beautifully, that he was so proud of her. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Eleanor thought she couldn't do it, when the pain was too much and she wanted to give up. But Pierce was there, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, telling her she was the strongest person he'd ever known. And then, finally, as the sun set on the second day, their son was born. Pierce caught him with shaking hands, and when the baby's cry filled the cabin, strong and healthy, they both wept with relief and joy. "He's perfect," Pierce said, his voice thick with emotion as he placed their son in Eleanor's arms. "Look at him, Eleanor. Look at what we made." The baby had dark hair like his father and Eleanor's delicate features, and when he opened his eyes, they were the same honey color as Pierce's. Eleanor counted his fingers and toes, marveling at the tiny perfection of him, and she knew that her heart had just expanded to hold even more love than she'd thought possible. "What should we name him?" she asked. They discussed names for months, never quite settling on one. But looking at their son now, Pierce said, "What about Samuel, after my father, Samuel Yates?" "Samuel," Eleanor repeated, testing the name. "I love it. Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world." The next weeks were exhausting and wonderful. Eleanor learned to nurse Samuel, to soothe him when he cried, to function on almost no sleep. Pierce was an attentive father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Samuel when Eleanor needed rest, and talking to his son about the mountains and the life they would have together. "I never knew I could love like this," Pierce admitted one night, holding Samuel while Eleanor tried to eat dinner. "I thought loving you was the fullest my heart could get, but then he came along and it just expanded. How is that possible?" "It's the magic of family," Eleanor said softly. "It just keeps growing." Spring brought new challenges as Samuel became more aware and active, but it also brought joy. Eleanor would carry him outside to see the wildflowers, and Pierce would take them both down to the stream to watch the fish. Samuel's first smile came on a sunny morning in April, and his first laugh a few weeks later when Bear licked his toes. They fell into a rhythm, the three of them, a family unit that worked together like the gears in Eleanor's music box. Pierce would hunt and fish and tend to the heavier work, while Eleanor managed the cabin and the garden and cared for Samuel. But they were partners in everything, sharing the load and the joy equally. On their second wedding anniversary, Pierce gave Eleanor another music box, this one carved with a scene of their valley and designed to hold jewelry she didn't own. "You'll fill it someday," he promised. "And even if you don't, it's still yours, something beautiful just for you." Eleanor gave him a portrait she'd drawn of the three of them, Pierce and Eleanor and Samuel, sitting on the porch of their cabin. She'd been practicing her drawing all winter, wanting to capture this moment in their lives. Pierce hung it over the fireplace with such care, and he would often stop to look at it, a soft smile on his face. Samuel grew into a curious toddler with his father's love of the outdoors and his mother's quick mind. He followed Pierce everywhere, his small legs working hard to keep up with his father's long stride. Pierce was endlessly patient, answering Samuel's constant questions and teaching him about the world with the same care he'd once shown Eleanor. When Samuel was 2, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and when their daughter was born on a crisp autumn morning, it was faster too. Pierce delivered her just as he had Samuel, and when he placed the squalling infant in Eleanor's arms, his eyes were wet with tears. "Another perfect child," he said in wonder. "Eleanor, you amaze me." They named her Rose, after the wild roses that grew along the stream, and she had Eleanor's dark hair and delicate features with Pierce's strength, evident even as an infant. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to hold her and help take care of her, and Pierce and Eleanor's hearts melted watching their children together. The years flowed by like the stream outside their cabin, each season bringing new joys and challenges. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, learning to hunt and fish and track by the time he was 6. Rose was gentler but no less tough, able to keep up with her brother on long hikes and unafraid of the wilderness that surrounded them. Eleanor taught both children to read using the books on Pierce's shelves, and soon the cabin was filled with the sound of young voices reading Shakespeare aloud, stumbling over the complicated words but persistent. Pierce taught them to carve, and the shelves slowly filled with their creations, lopsided animals and simple boxes that Pierce and Eleanor treasured like they were made of gold. When Samuel was 8 and Rose was 6, they rode down to Fort Worth for supplies and found the town much changed. The railroad had come through, bringing new people and new buildings, and Fort Worth was growing into a real city. Margaret was still running the saloon, though her hair had gone gray and she moved a bit slower. "Look at you," Margaret said, hugging Eleanor tight. "You're glowing with happiness." "I told you that mountain man was going to be good for you." "You were right," Eleanor said, watching Pierce with the children at the general store, Samuel on his shoulders and Rose holding his hand. "You were so right." They stayed in town for 3 days, and Eleanor couldn't help but compare her life now to what it had been when she'd first arrived. She'd been so lost then, so broken and alone. And now she had everything: a husband who loved her, 2 beautiful children, and a home that filled her with joy. On the ride back to the valley, Samuel asked, "Mama, why did you used to live in town instead of with us?" Eleanor exchanged a look with Pierce, who nodded encouragingly. "I lived in town because I didn't have anywhere else to go. My mother had died and I was alone and scared. But then I met your father, and he showed me that I didn't have to be alone anymore. He brought me to the mountains and we built our family here together." "I'm glad you met Papa," Rose said seriously. "Otherwise we wouldn't be here." "I'm glad too, sweetheart," Eleanor said, her eyes meeting Pierce's over the children's heads. "I'm grateful every single day." That night, after the children were asleep, Pierce and Eleanor sat on the porch with the music box playing softly. Pierce had carved so many over the years that Eleanor had a whole shelf dedicated to them, each one unique and beautiful and precious. But the first one, the one that played her name, was still her favorite. "You ever regret it?" Pierce asked quietly. "Leaving town, living up here away from everything." Eleanor took his hand, rough and calloused from years of hard work, and pressed it to her heart. "I've never regretted a single moment. You gave me a life, Pierce. A real life full of love and meaning and beauty. How could I regret that? I just want you to be happy. I am happy, deliriously, completely happy." Eleanor kissed him softly. "You kept your promise, you know. You said you'd spend your life making me happy, and you have. Every single day." As they sat there under the stars, the music box playing its gentle melody, Eleanor thought about the girl she'd been when she'd first arrived in Fort Worth. That girl had owned nothing, had been nothing but a survivor. But Pierce had seen something in her worth loving, worth cherishing, and he'd given her beautiful things, music boxes and a home and his heart and their children, and a life beyond anything she'd ever dreamed possible. The years continued to pass, each one adding new memories to their collection. Samuel grew into a young man much like his father, tall and strong with a gentle heart and a deep love for the wilderness. At 20, he married a girl from Fort Worth named Clara who wasn't afraid of the mountains, and they built their own cabin just over the ridge from Pierce and Eleanor's. Rose, at 18, was courted by a rancher's son, but she wasn't ready to settle down yet, preferring to help her parents and explore the high country on her own terms. Pierce's hair had gone silver at the temples, and Eleanor had laugh lines around her eyes and mouth from years of smiling. But they were as in love as they'd been that first night on the porch when Pierce had kissed her under the stars. Maybe more, because their love had been tested by time and hardship and had only grown stronger. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered at the cabin. Samuel and Clara brought their 3 children, and Rose had finally brought her rancher home to meet the family officially. Margaret had passed away 2 years before, but her memory lived on in the stories they told, and the gratitude Eleanor felt for the woman who'd given her a chance when she'd had nothing. Pierce stood and raised his glass of whiskey, and the conversation quieted. 25 years ago, I rode into Fort Worth chasing bounties, and not expecting anything more than a few supplies and a hot meal. Instead, I found the love of my life standing on a boardwalk looking lost and brave and beautiful. Eleanor, you have made every day since then worth living. You've given me a family, a purpose, and more happiness than I deserve. I love you more today than I did then, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she stood and kissed him to the sound of their family cheering. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for giving me beautiful things when I'd never owned anything beautiful before. Thank you for being mine. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the cabin was quiet, Eleanor opened the first music box, the one that played her name. The mechanism was old now, the sound slightly tinny from years of use, but it was still the most beautiful thing she owned. Remember when you gave this to me? She asked Pierce, who was banking the fire for the night. I remember being terrified you'd think I was crazy, Pierce said, coming to sit beside her. A strange mountain man carving music boxes for a woman he barely knew. I thought it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. I still do. I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that was just yours, Pierce said softly. But I think maybe I wanted to give you that music box so you'd remember me when I left town. I was already falling in love with you, and I wanted you to have a piece of my heart even if you never felt the same way. Well, it worked. I couldn't stop thinking about you, or the music box, or the fact that someone had cared enough to make something so special just for me. Eleanor turned to look at him, at the face she knew as well as her own, weathered by time but still strong and kind and beautiful to her. You changed my life, Pierce Yates. You took a broken girl with nothing and gave her everything. You were never broken, love, just bent by circumstance. And you gave me everything too, a reason to come down from my mountain, a reason to let someone in, a reason to believe in love and family and all the things I'd given up on. Pierce cupped her face in his hands. Growing old with you has been the greatest adventure of my life. They sat there in the firelight, listening to the music box play its simple melody, and Eleanor felt a contentment so deep and pure. It was almost painful. She'd survived poverty and loss and loneliness, and she'd come out the other side into a life filled with love and meaning and beautiful things. Not just the music boxes that lined her shelves, though she treasured every one of them, but the beautiful sunrise that painted the mountains gold every morning, the beautiful sound of her grandchildren's laughter, the beautiful feeling of Pierce's arms around her after 25 years of marriage, the beautiful life they'd built together in this valley, far from the noise and chaos of the growing world beyond. Years continued to accumulate like snow on the mountain peaks, and Eleanor and Pierce grew older but never apart. Samuel and Clara gave them 5 grandchildren total, and Rose eventually married her rancher, a kind man named Thomas, who built her a house halfway between his family's ranch and the mountain valley, so she could have both worlds. Pierce's hands, once so strong and sure, developed arthritis that made carving difficult. But he refused to stop, working slowly and carefully to create music boxes for each of his grandchildren. Eleanor would sit with him on difficult days, helping hold the wood steady while he carved, and together they created beautiful things despite the pain in his joints. Eleanor's own body showed the wear of years. Her back ached from decades of hard work, and her eyesight wasn't what it used to be. But Pierce was always there with a strong arm to lean on, with glasses he'd ordered from a catalog so she could continue reading, with love and patience, and the same devotion he'd shown her since the beginning. On a spring morning when Eleanor was 68 and Pierce was 72, they sat on their porch watching the sun rise over the mountains they'd called home for more than 4 decades. Bear had been gone for years, replaced by a succession of dogs that had all earned the same name in honor of the original. The current Bear, a gentle giant of a mutt, dozed at their feet. "I've been thinking about that first day," Eleanor said, holding Pierce's gnarled hand in hers. "When you brought me that music box and I cried because no one had ever given me anything beautiful before. I remember, I was afraid I'd made a terrible mistake. You gave me the world with that music box," Eleanor said softly. "You showed me that I was worth something, that someone saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself. That was the day my real life began." Pierce lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me just as much love. You took a lonely man who'd forgotten how to hope and you reminded him what it meant to live instead of just survive. Every music box I've ever carved has been an attempt to show you how much you mean to me, but I don't think I'll ever make enough to truly express it." "You've made dozens," Eleanor protested, thinking of the shelves full of music boxes, each one unique and precious. "And I'd make 1,000 more if I could. 10,000. However many it took to make sure you knew every single day that you are loved beyond measure." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence watching the world wake up around them. The stream still ran clear and cold, just as it had when they'd first arrived. The mountains still stood tall and proud, unchanging and eternal. And their love, tested by time and hardship and the simple wear of living, remained as strong and true as it had been that night on a Fort Worth porch when a mountain man had taken a chance and offered his heart to a lost girl. When Rose and Thomas came to visit later that week, bringing their youngest daughter Sarah, they found Pierce and Eleanor in the workshop. Pierce was carefully carving while Eleanor held the wood steady, and they were humming together, the same off-key but cheerful tune they'd hummed while working for 40 years. "You two never stop, do you?" Rose asked with affectionate exasperation. "Why would we stop?" Eleanor asked, looking up with a smile. "Your father's making a music box for Sarah's 18th birthday. We've got 2 more months to finish it." Sarah, a bright-eyed girl who loved her grandparents fiercely, came to watch the work with reverent attention. What will it play, Grandpa? Your name, of course, Pierce said, his voice gruffer than it used to be but still warm. Just like I made for your grandmother and your mother and all your cousins, each one playing your name in a melody that's just for you. Will you teach me to carve? Sarah asked. I want to learn how to make beautiful things like you do. Pierce and Eleanor exchanged a look full of joy and pride. We'd love to teach you, Eleanor said, but you have to promise to be patient with yourself. Beautiful things take time. Sarah proved to be a dedicated student, and over the next months, she spent every weekend at her grandparents' cabin learning to carve. Pierce taught her the techniques, his hands guiding hers even when the arthritis made his fingers stiffen. Eleanor taught her about patience and vision, about seeing the beauty hidden in a piece of rough wood and working to reveal it. By the time Sarah's 18th birthday arrived, she had not only received her music box from Pierce, but had also carved one herself, a simple but lovely box that played a melody she'd composed with Eleanor's help. The pride on Pierce and Eleanor's faces, as Sarah presented her creation to the family, was matched only by Sarah's own joy at having made something beautiful with her own hands. You've given me such a gift, Sarah told her grandparents later, when the party had wound down and they sat together on the porch. Not just teaching me to carve, but showing me what love looks like, what a life well lived looks like. Eleanor hugged her granddaughter close, breathing in the scent of youth and possibility. You've given us a gift too, sweetheart. You've reminded us that the things we create and the love we share don't end with us. They continue on, generation after generation. As the years advanced further, Pierce's health began to decline more noticeably. The arthritis spread to his knees and hips, making it hard for him to walk the distances he once had covered with ease. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Eleanor never wavered. On days when the pain was bad, she would read to him from their beloved books, her voice bringing the words to life just as it had for their children decades before. Eleanor's own health remained relatively good, though she moved slower and tired more easily. She tended their garden with the help of grandchildren who came to visit, and she made sure Pierce took his medicine and ate properly even when he claimed he wasn't hungry. One evening in late fall, when Eleanor was 73 and Pierce was 77, they sat by the fire with the original music box playing its gentle melody. Pierce had been unusually quiet all day, and Eleanor could sense something weighing on his mind. "What is it, love?" she asked gently. Pierce was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about when I'm gone, about you being here alone. Pierce, please, let me say this." He took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis. "I need to know that you'll be taken care of. Samuel and Rose have both said you can live with them, and I need you to promise me you'll do that. Don't stay up here alone in the winter. It's too dangerous." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I promise. But you're not going anywhere anytime soon, do you hear me? We have years left together." "I hope so, love. I surely hope so. But if I've learned anything in this life, it's that tomorrow isn't promised. So I need to make sure you know right now how grateful I am for every moment we've had. You took a lonely mountain man and gave him a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up grateful every single day. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Finch Yates, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "As would I," Eleanor said through her tears. "Every hardship, every challenge, every moment I'd live it all again because it led me to you." They held each other by the firelight, the music box playing its endless melody, and they were grateful for another day together. Pierce lived for 3 more years, each one a gift they treasured. He saw Samuel's youngest daughter get married, and he held his first great-grandchild, a boy with honey-colored eyes who gripped his great-grandfather's finger with surprising strength. He carved his last music box for Eleanor on their 50th wedding anniversary, his hands shaking but his love steady. And when she opened it and heard the melody, he'd composed a complicated, beautiful piece that incorporated both their names. She wept with the same wonder she'd felt at the first one. Pierce Yates died peacefully in his sleep on a snowy January night, with Eleanor lying beside him holding his hand. He simply didn't wake up, and though Eleanor's grief was profound and terrible, she took comfort in knowing he'd gone peacefully, surrounded by love in the home they'd built together. The funeral was held in Fort Worth, and it seemed like half the territory came to pay their respects. Pierce had been known far and wide as an honest man, a skilled hunter, and a devoted family man. But for Eleanor, he had simply been her love, her partner, her heart. She moved in with Rose and Thomas as she'd promised, but every spring and summer, she returned to the cabin in the valley. Samuel and his sons maintained it carefully, making sure it was ready for her visits, and Eleanor would spend her days there surrounded by memories and music boxes, and the endless beauty of the mountains Pierce had loved. She lived to be 87 years old, long enough to see 7 great-grandchildren born, and to teach 3 more young people the art of carving music boxes. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, telling stories of her life with Pierce to anyone who would listen, making sure that his memory and their love story lived on. On a warm summer evening, Eleanor sat on the cabin porch with her great-granddaughter Emma, a girl of 15 who reminded Eleanor so much of herself at that age. Emma was carving her first music box under Eleanor's watchful eye, her young hands careful and sure. "Tell me again about when Grandpa Pierce gave you the first music box," Emma asked, as she always did. She never tired of hearing the story. Eleanor smiled, opening the original box and letting the familiar melody fill the air. "I had never owned anything beautiful before. I was working in a saloon, just trying to survive, and I didn't think I deserved beautiful things. But Pierce saw something in me I couldn't see in myself, and he carved me this box that played my name. It was the most romantic, most thoughtful gift anyone had ever given me, and it changed my life." "Because you fell in love with him," Emma said. "Because I learned that I was worthy of love," Eleanor corrected gently. "And yes, I fell deeply, completely in love with him. He spent 50 years showing me every single day that I was precious to him, that I mattered. And now, even though he's gone, I'm surrounded by beautiful things, these music boxes, yes, but also our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The family we built together, the love we shared, those are the most beautiful things of all." Emma looked at the music box she was carving with new understanding. "I want to make beautiful things for people I love, like Grandpa Pierce did." "Then you will," Eleanor said, patting her hand. "And you'll carry on the tradition of love and craftsmanship that your great-grandfather started. That's the greatest gift we can give, not just beautiful objects, but the love and care that goes into making them." That night, Eleanor went to sleep in the cabin she and Pierce had shared for so many years, surrounded by music boxes and memories. She dreamed of a young mountain man with honey-colored eyes riding into Fort Worth, of the first time he'd taken her hand, of the way he'd looked at her on their wedding day. She dreamed of their children being born, of decades of sunrises over the mountains, of a life so full of love it had overflowed into generations. Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her face, with the original music box playing softly on the table beside her bed. They buried her next to Pierce in the valley they'd both loved, under a pine tree with mountains rising all around. Her family gathered there every year on her birthday, and they would bring the music boxes that Pierce and Eleanor had made, and they would open them all at once so that the air was filled with melodies, different songs, different names, but all created with the same love and care that had defined Pierce and Eleanor's life together. And Sarah, who had learned to carve from her grandparents and had taught her own children and grandchildren the same skill, would tell the story of the mountain man who had carved a music box for a lost girl, and how that single act of love and generosity had created a legacy that would continue for generations to come. Because Eleanor had been right, beautiful things took time, but they were always worth the effort, and they lasted far beyond the hands that created them, living on in the hearts of those who received them and the stories that were told about them. The cabin still stood in the valley, maintained by Pierce and Eleanor's descendants as a reminder of where their family's story had begun. Inside, on a special shelf, sat dozens of music boxes, each one a testament to love and craftsmanship, and the belief that everyone deserved beautiful things. And on quiet evenings when the family gathered there, they would open the first music box, the one that played Eleanor's name in a melody Pierce had created with his own hands, and they would listen to that simple, sweet tune and remember the love story that had started it all. A mountain man and a lost girl, finding each other in the Wild West and building a life that had been rich beyond measure. Not because of money or status or anything the world deemed important, but because of love, pure and simple and true. The kind of love that carved music boxes and built cabins and raised families and left a legacy that would never be forgotten. Eleanor Finch had never owned anything beautiful before Pierce Yates carved her a music box that played her name. But in the end, she had owned the most beautiful thing of all, a love that had lasted a lifetime and beyond, a love that had transformed them both, a love that had created beauty enough to fill generations with joy and wonder and hope. And that was the greatest gift of all.